Good morning, Coach Slack here again, continuing our series on the ascetical homilies of St. Isaac the Syrian. On this, which will be day 2, homily 1, page 2, or in this case, page 114 in this translation. But first, I would like to quickly address a comment made yesterday by my YouTube friend Mem Legou, who points out that St. Isaac's intended audience was certainly monastics, those living in solitude or seeking the life of stillness, the hesychastic way of life, if you will, and he's certainly correct in this. For centuries, that was how this book has been used. But it's addressed in the foreword, these thoughts, and so I'll read this paragraph really quick. Since the primary purpose of this book is the instruction of those in the desert, one may rightly ask why the great labor and cost in translating and printing such a work was undertaken, since there are so few, if any, desert dwellers and workers of stillness in the world today. The answer can be found in the latter of St. John Climacus, who writes, "Angels are a light for monks, and the monastic life is a light for all men." Step 26, verse 31. Thus, both monastics living in Cenobia, monasteries of communal life and rule, and lay people can glean words of instruction for salvation from those living the angelic life in stillness. So I think that paragraph addresses that issue very directly and clearly. But thanks for leaving the comment, ma'am. I actually appreciate that, and I love feedback, so if others want to leave feedback, please do so in the comments, and I will look into all these comments, of course, all the time. All right, so let's get into page 2. Until the soul becomes drunk with faith in God by receiving a perception of the power of faith, she can neither heal the malady of senses nor be able forcibly to tread visible matter underfoot, which is the barrier to things that are within and beyond perception by the senses. Reason is the cause of free will, and a fruit of both is aberration. Without the first, namely reason, there is no second, free will, and where the second is lacking, there the third, aberration, is held as with a bridle. When grace is abundant in a man, he easily scorns the fear of death on account of his longing for righteousness, and he finds in his soul many reasons for the necessity of suffering tribulation for the fear of God. All things that are thought to harm the body and that suddenly attack its nature, consequently causing it to suffer, are reckoned in his eyes as nothing in comparison with what is to be hoped for hereafter. It is not possible for us to know the truth unless temptations are allowed to come upon us, and a man's mind gives him assurance of exactly this, and further, of the fact that God takes very great forethought for men, and that there is no human being who is not under his providence. And this especially he sees pointed out as clearly as by a finger in the case of those who go out to seek him and endure suffering for his sake. But when lack of faith is planted in a man's heart, then all we have said is found to be nearly the opposite. For him, knowledge is greater than faith, since he relies on investigation. Trust in God is not present in everything he does, nor is God's providence for man taken into consideration. But such a man is continually waylaid in these matters by those who in a moonless night lie in ambush to shoot down a man with their arrows. The beginning of a man's true life is the fear of God. But the fear of God will not be persuaded to dwell in a soul together with distraction over outward things. For by serving the senses, the heart is scattered, driven away from delight in God. For our inward thoughts, it is said, are bound by their perception to the sensory organs that serve them. Whew, it's just always, every page, this is how it goes with St. Isaac. Just so many pearls, so many gems, so much wisdom. And as I mentioned yesterday, if you read this page today, tomorrow, a year from now, 10 years from now, it could totally affect you in a different way. But I'll share with you some of my thoughts that were coming to mind as I was reading this today. When he's mentioning in this sentence, reckoned in his eyes as nothing in comparison with what is hoped for in the hereafter. Talking about suffering tribulation is nothing compared to the hereafter. It reminds me of when I sit with my elder on the Holy Mountain. Sometimes, especially when I'm preparing to leave the Holy Mountain, he tries to give me a perception of eternity, and he reminds me of that's at what's at stake in this life. And so one time he says to me, he says, Mihaly, he says, do you know how long eternity is? I said, no, I don't. And he says, well, imagine this. He says, imagine a bird landing on a piece of granite and starting to peck that away. And how long do you think it would take him to peck that granite away? And I was like, oh, is it possible? And he says, yes, it's possible. It could be done. And he goes, I said, well, it would be a very long time, certainly. And he says, yes. He says, so now imagine that granite being the size of the moon, and that same bird landing on it and starting to peck that away. How long do you think it would take him to peck that away? And I was like, oh, that would be so long. That would be very long. I can't even imagine how long. And he says, yes. He says, and that is still not eternity. That bird would finish pecking that granite the size of the moon away before eternity was completed. And I was like, wow. And these are, that's just one story he's told me. He's told me others, and I'll think of those maybe another day. And then he says in this page, it is not possible for us to know the truth unless temptations are allowed to come upon us. And this quickly made me think of, the aphorism that's said to have been written at the entrance of the Oracle of Delphi, which was, know thyself. And sometimes, like, I was a philosophy major in college, and I've read a lot of philosophy books all throughout high school and in my early 20s, and certainly Socrates uses this aphorism a lot, and Plato, writes about it the way that Socrates used it, and he started a lot of his lessons. And so I often would think about this, and now I apply it to my Christian life, and it's kind of like knowing our place in this life, and our purpose, and our purpose is to love God and to love our fellow human beings, and that's really it, and to strive to be connected with Him on a daily basis, and to try to reciprocate His love for us and creating us and to blessing us with this life and this opportunity. So I'm thinking that, like when we have temptations, crosses that we're bearing, it's really allowing us to discover our weaknesses and our strengths and who we are, and to remember our dependence upon God. And then one more thought I'm having, so, I could literally probably talk about this all day, just this one page. But, at the end, he's saying, by serving the senses, the heart is scattered, driven away from delight in God. For our inward thoughts, it is said, are bound by their perception to the sensory organs that serve them. And this makes me think of, like, certain times in my life, when I was young, perhaps younger, and maybe even now sometimes, when we're pleasure seeking. We find ourselves pleasure seeking, like trying to fulfill those senses, taste, touch, smell, all these types of things, to find delight in those sensory organs, and pleasure seeking, basically, compared to like delight, like what he is translated here as delight in God, or I would like to think of as the virtue of true joy, which when I'm on the holy mountain, or in a church service, or sometimes with my family, or sometimes even just walking in the woods, or being here on the back porch, when you feel the grace of God, those moments when we're able to find that grace of God, or feel it, or it's bestowed upon us, and we're blessed with it, that feeling of just utter joy or delight in God, and that connection, and I think he's comparing that to that pleasure seeking, that sensory, seeking to find joy through our sensory organs, as opposed to like our inner being and that grace of God, that true joy. I think he's comparing that there and trying to express to us that there's no comparison. And so anyhow, these are some of my thoughts when I'm reading through that page with you. And in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, have a great day.